This is TWiT.
Kind of a shock. Came out of nowhere. This week, Apple bought Pixelmator, makers of Pixelmator Pro, Pixelmator for iOS, and the Photomator apps. Much beloved apps. I loved Gus Mueller's take. He's the guy who does Acorn.
Yeah.
And he says that I didn't realize this. In fact, it kind of surprised me that Pixelmator and Acorn came out roughly at the same time, 15 days apart in 2007. And since Affinity, which makes Affinity Photo and Affinity Pages and all of that, was purchased by Canva in March, Acorn is the last independent Mac image editor from that era.
Acorn is the cheese.
I like Acorn, and I used both. They do different things. And he says, yeah, there was a lot of overlap. So what's happening? Is this a acqui-hire? Or is Apple going to bring back Aperture? There are a lot of questions. What are your thoughts on this?
I don't think they're bringing back Aperture. I mean, I think that this could be incorporated into Photos. It could be its own app. It could be, there's a variety. I mean, when we saw, there's other things they bought that they've absorbed into other apps. There's other things they bought that they let stay kind of where they are. I think it'd be a great addition to some of these other tools. We talked about this on Office Hours a little bit. I'm not that excited about paying another subscription. Like, it's not like, I don't think that would get me into
and Pixelmator was not a subscription, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
there was an
$50
option.
and you got it. Yeah.
I think there was an option.
But there was an option. Okay.
Yeah, if you wanted to do it that way, but I think but you could get it for $50. I bought both Acorn and Pixelmator Pro or whatever, or bought it as they were released. So I didn't, I've had them since then. I think the purchase of Affinity probably put a fair bit of pressure on both of those apps because suddenly they had a lot more money, and Affinity had done a better job at being more Photoshop-like. So it was so it had a couple features. I used Affinity mostly. I used Pixelmator for a long time, and that used to be the standard thing that was installed onto most of our machines at PixelCore. I moved to Affinity for two reasons. One is they had this very odd 360 painting tool that the other one, nothing else had. So that was one reason. And they added TGA with Alpha at my request. Nice. And so there was because I couldn't find another thing other than Photoshop that would export TGAs. And I admittedly went to Pixelmator and said, hey, I really need this export. And they're like, oh, it's not a big demand for that. And I was like, okay. And so anyway, and Affinity put it in. And so a bunch of us all moved to Affinity because there was finally a non-Photoshop tool that would export stuff we needed for Blackmagic switchers, and so.
But that is a unique use case.
Yeah, well, when there's a million switchers.
Speaking of image erasing,
switchers out there, that's a thing.
Pixelmator was one of the first to put image erasing, and I was really blown away by how well it did a few years ago.
I mean, I think that the big thing is that they by not being constrained by the technical debt that Photoshop had, there are so many of the plugins that Pixelmator does and that Affinity does and that Acorn does that are much, much faster than if you do it in Photoshop. Like, you can do them in real time in a way that you can't do it otherwise. In the same time, what's interesting is I actually don't think that Pixelmator is at the pro level is really that competitive with Photoshop. It doesn't have alpha channels, doesn't have, a lot of the other things. So it's a great app for Apple to get without getting, I'm not sure what Adobe thinks, but I doubt they look at that as something that's digging in deeply into their bottom line, and so I don't think you're going to get a change, a reaction from Adobe by buying this. And I think that it would be an incredible tool next to Keynote or, being able to add.
That's what I was hoping is that they would add it to the iWork.
That's frankly. What if they did that and made it part of that thing, I think it would be a much better solution than if they started charging us a subscription for it.
But Gruber points out Photomator integrates with Apple Photos.
Right. It does very well.
So there is something to be said for making that be, part of the Apple Photos.
My gut feeling, Photomator, it's funny, Photomator's been doing AI replace cleanup in Photos for years now.
Right.
And it was frustrating that it wasn't in Photos. It's got some nice tools. My hope is that the stuff that's been going on with Photomator maybe puts some people on the Photos team and get some improved editing tools in Photos. But Pixelmator, that's the question. When I initially, Apple can do this two ways, right? And my initial thoughts were, oh, they're just going to eat this thing. And,
right. That's my fear.
And we're never going to see it. I actually think Pixelmator is so advanced, and there's so much of it, that I actually have a hard time imagining that they would just swallow it whole and we'd never see it again. So here's my best guess now is this, and this is just a theory. I don't know anything about this, but what matters to Apple? The iPhone. What matters the most about the iPhone to Apple? In many ways, it's photography. So I think maybe there's an argument that Apple camera technology and the people involved in Apple's camera stuff are very ambitious. And in the end, whatever they build, however ambitious it is, it has to integrate with their consumer photo app.
Yeah.
Because that's all they got. And it makes me think maybe somebody said, can we have a more advanced photo editing app as part of our Apple software that doesn't force us to toss every last thing we do into Photos? Could we have something, because we have Final Cut. We can toss things in Final Cut. We don't have to toss them in iMovie. And now those are across platforms. Could we do something a little more advanced than Photos? And they looked around and said, well, actually we could. And that maybe that's what motivated this purchase, is they want a platform for a Photos Pro or Pixels or whatever they want to call it that allows them to have something like Final Cut and Logic for photography that's not Photoshop and it's not Lightroom and it's not trying to be, but that lets them say, and if you want to do X with this new amazing future iPhone camera feature, we have the app for you that you get for free or for a subscription price or whatever. So that right now, that's my guess, is that something like Pixelmator will stick around in some form, and that maybe that's why Apple cares so much, is that there's a part of Apple, which is the iPhone and photography, that Apple actually really does care about. And once you start thinking about every photo feature you add has to get stuck in Photos, a consumer image library and light editing app, it is actually kind of a mismatch. And if they built every feature for iMovie, you would be saying the same thing. So that's what I think now.
And this is what makes Pixelmator unique. I'm not going to compare it to Acorn or others. I'm going to compare it mostly to Photoshop, because if you're just talking about is there really, really good there's the built-in photo editor you get. There is the intermediary thing where you're still pretty much just sliding sliders around and you want to use AI features. And then there's Photoshop. And Lightroom will give you that. Photoshop will give you that. It's not even that expensive. I think it's still just $10 a month if you just want those two apps. Owning a company like Pixelmator will do is that Pixelmator is something that Adobe products aren't. It is down to the DNA. It is a Mac app. It is an iOS app. There is nothing about it that seems like there was any quarter given for making this multi-platform. It was just if you could even think of it as the most florid demo of every single Mac technology there is, down to Metal, down to the APIs, down to user interface, everything. It is an elegantly Mac product. So I don't know why Apple necessarily would want to own it, as opposed to be happy that it exists and keep promoting it in their keynotes as they would like to do. I would be shocked if it were, hey, we could really make the Photos app spectacularly great and steal all those really great AI features. Of course, we'll throw everything else. We're not going to actually have the app itself. I don't think they would be stupid enough to do that, and I don't think that the Pixelmator team, unless that would be a hell of a big truck filled with the sort of banknotes that are only in like Ripley's Believe It or Not, the kind of like the $10,000 William Friedkin note or whatever. That's how much money they would have to do to say, oh, we're willing to basically put our product in a basket and send it down the river.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a price. I'm sure that there is a price for which that they might not care. But I think you're right. I think the counter might be, could Apple take pieces of it and put it in Pages and Keynote and Freeform? And like Freeform is kind of designy a little bit, but I don't think it's the right fit. I think the right fit is to do a really good photo app. And if you haven't used Pixelmator, like, it's Photoshop, basically. It's got layers and it's got vector tools, and it's like way beyond, like, Photos, the app could not contain it. It doesn't make sense. Photomator is like nice features that should be in Photos. Pixelmator is Photoshop. So now Apple has a Photoshop that, as Andy pointed out, 100% right, is very Apple-y. It is the most Apple-y.
Yeah.
So that's why Acorn, with all respect to Gus, Acorn isn't going to get acquired because it's so not a Mac.
Well, it's
a one-person shop, so it's
I love it, and I use it all the time.
It's an old-style Mac app, whereas Pixelmator is like a Mac and iPad and iOS, like cross-platform in Apple's platforms.
Apple made it. Yeah,
it's also, and that's another reason why it would confuse me if Apple did not continue to support it as a separate product, because it's not just, hey, wow, it's photo. It's now, instead of just pushing sliders around in the Photos app, now I've got like something that's almost Photoshop-like. It's not just Photoshop-like. It goes off on its own direction. As Jason mentioned about the vector tools, it's not just for, hey, I want to increase the brightness here. Hey, I want to do layers. Hey, I want to delete something from the background. It really is a 100% independent creative tool. So as its own thing, it is a natural fit for Apple's portfolio, particularly if they make a kick-butt iPad version of it. It is such a great way to show off all the technologies that Apple has been investing in for years and years and years, including the AI tools that they are, like, as we discussed earlier, kind of not philosophically excited about putting into the mainstream camera app or the mainstream Photos app. They could still offer all that sort of stuff with this free app that you can download alongside iWork. Again, it would be such a damn shame and such a damn disappointment if they did not simply continue it as Pixelmator, or even if what they did with it was, again, give it a new name, but it's still clearly Pixelmator. There's still the Pixelmator group that's updating it. Only they now have access to the silicon. They now have access to, oh, by the way, here is what the GPU on Apple Silicon in 5 years is going to be able to do. You get to start supporting it right now, and you get to start telling us what this hardware should be doing now. I mean, I hate to. I'm not going to go so silly as to think that, gee, this would be a great step towards having a touchscreen Mac, wouldn't it? But that's as far as I go. But the worst thing absolutely would be, oh, great, there's a Pixel. I can recognize the bones, the blood splatter evidence of Pixelmator's acquisition in this one new feature that's on my iPhone.
I think that one of the things that Apple could have been looking at is, hey, we need to have more control over. There's a lot of features that we'd like to take advantage of with Apple Intelligence, with all of the data that we're talking about computational photography. Apple, has a lot of data connected to those photos, and nothing's really taking full advantage of those right now, other than Photos, and probably that's still kind of hidden under a veneer of consumer interfaces. And so I think that Apple could have been looking at this area, and they could definitely build their own team and do this, or you could buy a team, buy a company and have the team there. And I think that there's a lot of value in Pixelmator being able to integrate with Keynote, integrate with Pages, integrate with being able to add USDZ, features to it, being able to do those kinds of things. Because one of the things that Adobe's actually pulling away from Apple on is the ability to generate high quality 3D assets. And Apple, that's a big deal for a lot of what Apple's doing with AR and VR. But Adobe is crushing it. And why are they crushing it? Is because they bought Algorithmic. So they bought one company that brought Adobe had a bunch of failures for a decade, gave up and bought this great company out of France that really brought all the tools they needed into it, and they just keep on leveraging that end over end over end. And they're building like simplistic now. Project Neo is this simplistic modeling tool that you can grab onto and start to build stuff. And so I think Apple needs those generation, because they need to control. Apple likes to be able to control its own destiny, and with Final Cut and Motion and Logic, they control their own destiny in those areas of. It doesn't mean that everyone's using those, but they have somewhere they can push that technology into it and at least prod people forward in that area. And so I think Pixelmator fits that bill as far as in a still image, vector image, that type of thing, being able to do that. So I think it's a great purchase. I don't think they're going to tear it apart. I think, I think that you could see a bunch of the features that they have fed into it, but just those features, I think Apple could write themselves. I think that having the apps themselves, I think, is useful.
Yeah, they have a professional video and film editing tool. They have a professional audio editing tool. It makes sense for them to say, I want to have a professional static image generator tool. But it's not, as you say, it's not just necessarily 2D images. Again, the thing that keeps, the thing that Adobe does that keeps its hooks into me, that guarantees that $10 or $15 a month for me for the photography package is, so now if I have a piece of art of a flying toaster, but I'm thinking, oh boy, I wish it were head on instead of 3/4, it will turn it into a 3D object, and I can now spin it and have a straight on version of this 3D toaster, even though I didn't have to turn it into a 3D object myself or give it any hints. That's the sort of problem solving, and I don't have the skills to do this myself, but hey, I've got $15 a month for this Photoshop, and it's got a brand new feature that dropped last month. Yeah, if Apple can do things like that, if they can make it so that anytime I want to do advanced asset creation, I hate to use those buzzwords, but that's the best way to put it, because I don't want to start the thought that, this is just an Adobe Photoshop alternative. It is like an asset, a creative asset creation thing. Anytime I'm in Keynote and I need an object to dress this thing up with, either generating it with AI or editing something that I already have, or drawing something brand new, or transmogrifying something, it has such slick integration with something like Pixelmator that's the tide that will elevate all creative boats on the Mac and on the iPad.